Thanks very much, Jennifer. Hello, everybody, and all those out in the radio land, way out in the future. My name's Peter Duncan, as Jennifer said. I am founder and CEO of MicroSeismic, Inc. We've been doing frac monitoring for about 15 years. We chased this business from the Barnett to the Haynesville to the Eagle Ford, the Bakken, and finally in the Permian. Our initial attempts in the Permian, which is a difficult problem. We're kind of weak, but we've managed to crack the code there over the last 5 years and to get some excellent data on hydraulic fracture monitoring in the Permian. Over that time, our clients have also been driving us to pull more knowledge out of these large data sets that we're acquiring. They said to us, Peter, we're paying a lot of money for this. Can't you give us something better than just the dots in the box? And that's what we've been able to do. So today, rather than me talk about what we can do, I've asked Allison here from Petroleum, one of the best-known consultants, geophysical consultants in Midland, to come and tell you something that we did for their company and the economic value that it delivered to them. Take it away, Allison.
All right. Thank you. So we're just going to go through a case study from a San Andres project in the Permian Basin. Okay, first of all, I'm a geophysicist, so it is incumbent on me to let you know that any money that you spend on geophysical technologies are really pennies on the dollar of profits that you can get in maximizing your assets. And this goes for microseismic monitoring, borehole geophysics, 3D seismic acquisition. When you look at the cost of what you're going to spend over the course of your project, the returns are significant. Today we're going to focus, as Peter said, on surface microseismic monitoring, and it's a horizontal San Andres project in the Permian Basin. Okay, just to give you a snapshot of where we are, you can see the red dot up there where it says Arrowhead on the map. The blue are San Andres production in the Permian Basin. We're on the northwest shelf in Cochran County. This is, the beginning of the project was a 5-well pilot hole program. Those were our science wells. We gathered whole core, did a good open hole logging suite with all of the state-of-the-art logs, and we decided to do one downhole seismic project because we had a monitor well available. In the course of that monitor, we also laid out surface patches because we knew we were going to get to a point where we wouldn't have any downhole wells available, and we wanted to know if we could collect surface microseismic. Luckily, we had good results on that. We saw that we could see microseismic events at the surface. So on well 3, where we did not have a monitor well available, we decided to deploy a full surface array. To date, there have been 11 wells drilled, 10 completed. There were no wireline logs run in any of the laterals, and we had no production logs, just to give you a sense of what the data collection has been like. Okay, just to recalibrate everybody's thinking, we are in a conventional rock here. We're in a dolomite with conventional porosities and permeabilities, which presents its own challenges for collecting surface microseismic data. Our wells were about 1.5-mile laterals at about 5,100 feet, true vertical depth. And I want to point out we are not in the ROZ zone. This is conventional San Andres production. Our frac design initially for our 1.5-mile laterals were 34 stages, 224 feet plug to plug, 4 clusters. That put our clusters about 55 feet apart. Keep in mind, because we are in a conventional reservoir, these were relatively small fracs and relatively low energy response to those small fracs. So that is one of the challenges of detecting events at the surface. Okay, so some of the other challenges that we had, you can see by this picture that we had sandy surface conditions, which could present poor coupling. We had wind noise to deal with. We have salts and anhydrites between our zone of interest and the surface where we're trying to record. And as I said before, low energy fracs produce low energy responses. So that's low magnitude events. The key to having a successful project here was good planning and doing our testing up front. Because we knew that we could see events and we knew what size events we were looking for, we could plan a successful surface array. What was key to this were the number of geophones that we deployed, and that's why that is at the top of this slide. 14,124 phones laid out on the surface in an 11-arm star array over 5 square miles. I cannot emphasize enough how important it was to have a large number of phones out there to get your best possible signal to noise. The wellbore here is the yellow line in the middle. We had 2,354 stations along each line. The stations were spaced 37 feet apart, and there were 6 geophones per station. Okay, so what did we get? What we got was very good data on par with downhole data with much better aerial extent. Our average horizontal uncertainty was 5 feet, average vertical 20 feet, which for our purposes was what we needed to see, and as I said, on par with downhole. The advantage here from downhole is that we gathered an event count of 14,300 events, 275 of which we were able to do moment tensor inversion, which for you non-geophysicists means that we could detect the slip mechanism on those events. We were able to calculate obviously our half length of our stimulated rock volume, just 250 to 300 feet, half length of propped volume, 80 to 90 feet, and most of our magnitude events were -2 or less. Now, how do we use this to add value? Well, we use this to add value by decreasing expenses. There are 2 ways that you can add value to a property. You can decrease your expenses, or you can increase production and increase reserves so that when you flip the property, you get more money for it. Right now, we're talking about how do we use this to decrease expenses? Well, because of what we saw in our frac, this is a picture of all the events that we gathered. And what you need to notice here is that basically every stage was stimulated more or less equally. The events were symmetric around the wellbore, both in a vertical and a horizontal sense. The stress directions made sense with what we had seen off of our FMIs. And let's see, what else did I want to point out? Those are the main things. The other thing we were interested in was to make sure that we did not grow down into a water leg, and we were able to stay pretty much above the water leg that we were interested in. So the data gave us what we were looking for. We also ran this real time so that the engineers were able to see what was happening in a stage, and as soon as that stage was over, we saw the data. If they wanted to tweak something for the next stage, they were able to. We did not choose to because we saw what we wanted to see. So after this, here's another picture of the event distribution, just pointing out how symmetrical horizontally and vertical the data actually was. We were trying to stay above, if you can see it, the P3. Below that really is where we get into the water. Most of our events were above the P3. One thing that the engineers did notice was that they felt like we could do a little bit better job of maybe getting better lateral growth and a little less vertical growth. So based on what we saw from this data, they have tweaked the design for subsequent fracs. We were also able to look at the productive stimulated rock volume and the stimulated rock volume. So on the left is the stimulated rock volume, and on the right is the productive stimulated rock volume. Now, since this is a conventional reservoir, The two are a little less related than they would be if you were in an unconventional reservoir, because you've already got good permeability and good porosity. And I'm going to let Peter talk a little bit more about how they calculate this when he gets up here and talks when I'm done. But right here, another thing that we noted was that if you look at the black outline, this is a gun barrel view of the well. The black outline is the stimulated rock volume. That is how far out we saw events. And the colored bullseye in the center is where they were able to calculate that we had actually placed proppant. Now, what you have on the left is the proppant that we actually placed. On the right is a model if we had only used 50% of the proppant that we used in the real frac. Now what you will see is that essentially we got 80% of the proppant placed over the area with 50% of the volume. So taking that into account, the engineers redesigned future fracs. So you can use less proppant and get the same effect. You're going to save money. So here are some of the things that the engineers did to when they changed the frac. Like I said, they felt like the frac was a little bit bigger than we needed. So what they did, because we did not see any overlap from stage to stage, and the events covered all of the stages and it looked like all of the clusters were being stimulated, they felt like we could increase the stage spacing and also increase the cluster spacing. And so we would have fewer stages per lateral. That would save money. As I said before, the frac size could be reduced. Basically what they did is they pretty much cut the sand volumes in half. So that saves money also. They lowered the proppant concentration. They didn't see any proppant concentrations above 1.5 that seemed to do anything significant based on the modeling. And because they were lowering the pumping rate, they added cross-linked fluids to carry the proppant. They also were trying to reduce height growth with this. They, in addition, added diverter material like they had done elements of big Wolfcamp player in Martin and Howard County. So they used some of what they had learned there to ensure that all the clusters were stimulated at the lower rate. So all in all, these factors resulted in a more compact, cost-effective frac and a completion that should enhance project economics. And in fact, the completion did cost significantly less than the original frac design. The well that they've tried this new completion on has only been on for about a week and a half. And right now, at this point, obviously it's still in flowback, but it is behaving like the other fracs had. So we feel like the cost savings is going to be effective and efficient. Now we'll talk a little bit about the other side. How do you add returns, add volumes, and add reserves? So this is some of the modeling that can be done based on the analysis, as Peter was saying, not just dots in a box, but some of the analysis that you can do, the reservoir modeling, after you've collected the microseismic data. And what we had MSI do was model 4 wells per section versus 6 wells per section and look at how that would affect the drainage and over the period of time. So this is just looking at 1 year, at T equals 1 year, what would be the difference between 4 wells per section and 6 wells per section. And I think you can tell that 6 wells per section has drained significantly more in the green than the 4 wells per section. Now, if you look at that in a vertical sense, which are these 2 pictures in the bottom, you can see on the 4 wells per section, you have some significant gaps in there where you haven't drained versus the 6 well. But more importantly, if you look at the economics on the slide above, you will see significant increases, which the red line would be the increases. You'll see significant increases in the oil production during the first year or two. Now this is important. More of your increases on the back end are from gas, but at the front end you're seeing significant increases in oil volumes and thus revenues at the front end of your project. So now I'll let Peter talk a little bit about how they do this work.
So I'm not going to talk about how we do this work because we're out of time. Okay. And you're lucky because of that. But I did want to say this is not your father's Oldsmobile. This is not legacy microseismic, and I hope you appreciate that. Let me highlight just two things. In real time, Allison was able to watch what was being done on each frac, and I saw people out there taking notes about how to frac their San Andres wells. But in real time, she was able to tell that we were fracking just the right amount. Think of it as a meat thermometer. You can tell when that frac has been cooked just the right amount or is getting overcooked. And then secondly, we're able to actually take those real-world, real-time laboratory measurements, in the field laboratory measurements, of what you did to that reservoir rock that incorporates the rock properties, the stress, and all of the things that happened while you pumped it, and determine the distribution of proppant, a reservoir enhanced permeability model, run it through a reservoir simulator, and we do that now on every one of our projects, run it through a reservoir simulator, and tell you not just EUR, which most of the engineers don't care about, they know how to get that, but also tell you what the drainage volume is over time. And that's what microseismic is about these days. Thanks.
Question to Peter and Allison, again, back to the data, ensuring that the data you're working with is clean. What steps did y'all take in the case study that y'all presented in the Permian?
Do you want to take that one, or do
Sure.
you want me?
So the seismic business has been collecting data for hundreds of years, thousands perhaps. And so internally our data is really well controlled. Where we have the problems is the interfaces between our data and the logs, or perhaps what's going on in the frac truck. And you'd be surprised how sometimes clocks are set to a different time zone, or the GPS hasn't been adjusted and things like that. And that's where, exactly as Deanna said, it's the discipline and the experience, having experienced people who kind of know where those mistakes are typically made, to go in and clean that data before we get too far down the road on our analysis.
And I would add also, gyro data is not always what you think it is, and is not always as accurate as you think it is. So you may think you know where your well is, but not necessarily. It may be off slightly. And I would also say in geophysical data, the data that we get, as I showed up there, always has uncertainties given with it. So for every data point we have an estimate of the uncertainty of that data. So as we're evaluating it, we can take that into account.